Chapter 11, Fourths, Fifths, and Tritones. A perfect fourth is the distance from the first note of a major scale to the fourth note, and a perfect fifth is the distance from the first note of a major scale to the fifth note. You will recall that these intervals are called perfect because they are among the most consonant intervals. Although there was a time in history when the perfect fourth was considered a dissonance, believe it or not. Examples of the perfect fourth and perfect fifth above the pitch C are shown here. This is the perfect fourth. And this is the perfect fifth. Some people listen to songs to try to recognize the sound of these intervals. The perfect fourth, some people hear, "Here comes the bride." And the perfect fifth, some people hear, "Twinkle, twinkle, little star." Now, by plotting these intervals on a keyboard, it is apparent that the perfect fourth can be defined as the distance of 5 half steps. You can see that we can count 5 half steps. The first tone, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That will always give you a perfect fourth. Here's the interval of a perfect fifth above C on the keyboard. You can always find a perfect fifth interval by counting up 7 half steps above the lowest note. There's the note. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. The perfect fifth. Remember, these intervals, as with all other intervals, can be found by just knowing the major scale. So we could, for example, start on a G and know the scale of G and go from the first note to the fifth note and get a perfect fifth, or from the first note to the fourth note. Likewise, we could start with a key such as E flat. And as long as we know the scale, we can go from the first note to the fifth note of that scale and get a perfect fifth, or go from the first note to the fourth note of that scale and get a perfect fourth. This can be helpful when building, recognizing, and altering the intervals. Now, we never use the term minor when discussing fourths or fifths, but you will encounter terms like augmented and diminished. An augmented interval is either a major or a perfect interval that has been expanded by a half step. And a diminished interval is a perfect interval that has been contracted by a half step. Now, the term diminished is also used to describe a minor interval that has been contracted by a half step, but we'll discuss that in a later chapter. As we did with thirds, it can be very helpful to memorize the qualities of the natural fourths and fifths. Those intervals that have no accidentals, in other words, just the white notes on the piano. And those intervals, you can hear them here. These are all perfect fourths, that is 5 half steps. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, except for the one that goes from F to B. If you count those half steps, because of all the black notes involved, you'll see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 half steps. In other words, a perfect fourth that's been expanded by a half step, and thus an augmented fourth. Here are all the perfect fifths on the white notes of the piano. And these are all perfect fifths. That is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 half steps, except for the fifth that spans the distance from B to F. In this case, if you count the half steps, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, you can see that it's not as large as your typical perfect fifth. Therefore, it is a diminished fifth. Interestingly, you may have noticed that a augmented fourth has 6 half steps, such as the one from F to B. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It is a fourth because it is 4 letters of the alphabet. 1, 2, 3, 4. But the diminished fifth also has 6 half steps. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Even though the interval seems to be the same size, this has to be called a fifth because it's 5 letters of the alphabet. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This diminished fifth, therefore, has the same kind of a sound with 6 half steps as the augmented fourth. They are both called tritones because they are 1, 2, 3 major seconds involved, or 3 whole steps. That gives it the name tritone, which is the same as 6 half steps. Because most natural fourths and fifths are perfect, it is easy to write and recognize them. In fact, most fourths and fifths that have the same accidental on the upper and lower note will be perfect. Here's some examples. And these are all perfect. Note the accidental on the top note is exactly the same as the accidental on the bottom note. Just remember that this will not be true of the fourths that span from F to B, or the fifths that span from B to F. Notice these are the magic letters, B and F, that are exceptional. Because these natural intervals are tritones, extra care must be taken to determine their qualities when accidentals are applied. Some examples are given below. Notice it's very difficult to predict just by looking at the upper and lower accidental whether these are perfect, augmented, or diminished. You have to do a little bit more work. You should now try check your understanding 11.1 on page 119. And now you should try check your understanding 11.2 on page 119.